Have you been following the wildfires out in Los Angeles?
Not per se, but I have seen a lot of the videos on the internet. And a star for the Los Angeles Clippers, Kawhi Leonard, he's dealt with a lot of injuries over the past few years. He actually just said he's stepping away from his team to go help his family and others with that because I know it's a big problem right now.
Oh yeah, that's great. I saw there was some actor, I forget what his name is, but he was on some local news station and he said, "If you're leaving your cars up here, leave your keys in the car so I can move it out of the way for the fire trucks."
That's crazy.
Yeah,
That is
it's
absolutely
weird.
crazy.
My favorite hike, the best hike I've ever been on, it was up in the Pacific Palisades. I was only up there 7, 8 months ago with my buddy Liam, and it's heartbreaking just to see all the damage to the neighborhoods and also thinking about the homeless people affected, especially down on Hollywood Boulevard, which is being threatened as we're recording this. But it's just really weird to look at these places you've not only visited but also neighborhoods that you were a part of your daily life for a period of your time, a period of your life. So that's I've been following that a lot. I know like the next like Hollywood cohort from my school is they're currently flying out there right now as we speak. So I wish them all the best with their safety and anyone out there. Thoughts and prayers to you. So, starting off this episode, recently there was a bit of pop culture that I wanted to talk about. I threw the suggestion out to Marsh to see if he wanted to chat about it. And because we're now a quarter of the way through the century, I can't believe it feels like yesterday was the early 2000s. Billboard dropped their list of the top 100 artists of the century so far. And the top 20 in particular is a bit strange. Marshall?
Yeah, it is kind of all over the place. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I love Eminem to death, but like, how is he at five in this scenario? Like he's like in my opinion, he should either be down like more towards 9, 10, or he should be top three. Like him at five is just weird to me. Rihanna being over Chris Brown, funny how that works.
Yeah, meant to be.
Kendrick and 50 Cent being 31 and 32 is kind of crazy.
Yeah, they got snubbed. They definitely got snubbed.
And who's actually 100? Hold on, I'm curious.
It's
Fall
Fallout
Out Boy is
Boy.
100. Yeah, you're definitely happy about that.
I didn't expect them to even make the list, so seeing them at 100 was nice. But I'm
What
not.
is Kid Rock doing at 83? Hold on, my bad.
Why is he up there? Oh
I don't
man,
know.
it's weird. It's gross to think about the blend of early 2000s stars and 2020 stars. That's how Chris Brown even was able to crack the top 20 because for some reason people decided that they liked him. I never understand the appeal of him. Pink, I feel like,
Yeah,
is way
neither do
too
I.
high. Katy Perry, she was huge for a few years, and I get it, but top 15, I feel like there are so many other artists who are just more influential, at least commercially so. Justin Timberlake, Lil Wayne, like we said earlier, 50 Cent, Kendrick, Britney Spears, they should all be higher than Katy, if you ask me. Were there any takes in the top 10 that made sense to you? Were there any takes that didn't make sense to you?
I'm surprised Usher's in there. I really am.
He had a lot of hits back in the day. 20 years ago, he was huge. He was
Yeah,
everywhere.
it's just like compared to like how like the media is now with how like views are and like uh public appeal towards artists compared to others. Just it just really surprises me that he's there over like some other people on this list.
Yeah, I wonder how much streaming versus physical sale copies plays into it because I know the physical sales kind of outweigh the streaming. And that's how Justin Bieber gets so high because he gets all that radio airplay because he releases stuff that is friendly to the
Yeah,
masses
for the most part. For the
for the
most
most
part.
part. Yes. So, no transition at all today. We're going to be talking about a very long movie, the longest movie that we've watched so far. It's called Once Upon a Time in America. It was directed by, forgive me if I mispronounce this, Sergio Leone. He directed The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. A few dollars more, Clint Eastwood, A Fistful of Dollars, lots of westerns. So this is sort of his late magnum opus. It came out just a couple years before he died, a bit of a departure from the aesthetics of the Western, but in many accounts, it sort of is a Western, if not an urban Western. It sort of reminds me of why people don't like when books are adapted into movies. They tend to say that the books are better. And I feel like a lot of that is because when you're reading a book, you sort of you feel like you're involved in the narrative. You build the
Yeah,
world.
you're visualizing yourself compared to it being put on a screen for you.
Exactly. And a lot of people say, a lot of people have a more fulfilling experience that way. But I feel like Once Upon a Time in America, which is based off a novel, it sort of reminds me why we don't see more direct adaptations of novel to screen, because this one just screamed novel. I mean, the first hour and a half alone is just a prequel setup to the main character Noodles and his upbringing, his relationship with his partner in crime, Max Berkovitz, also played by James Woods. This movie takes on so many detours throughout its experience. It starts off kind of keeping us up to speed with the present circumstances in which Noodles, the main character played by Robert De Niro, has to flee this robbery. He's accused of ratting out his crew, and he has the crew that has robbed the Federal Reserve. And it just sort of is this cat and mouse between his friends who he's betrayed and himself who's trying to escape the area. He lives in an old Jewish neighborhood in New York. And then we cut ahead to the future where he returns because he gets some sort of message from an anonymous source that tells him to, quote, finish the job that he started. And he gets a mysterious suitcase filled with money, which causes him to just sort of
Oh,
wander around the neighborhood and retrace his past.
he got that briefcase from Max, by the way. I figured that out.
Yes, Max, the big twist of this film, I'm going to spoil it, is that his best friend Max, who he thought was dead, was actually alive this whole time. And he had faked his death and became a secretary for the state. I believe it's the state, if not, it's the city.
I
Um,
believe he went under the alias by Mr. Bailey, if I remember.
Yeah, he goes by Mr. Bailey. And he's the one who gave Noodles the suitcase. And he wants Noodles to kill him because Max carries guilt from all the years of crime, all the years of profiting off of crime. He's an old man now. They're no longer young and youthful and vibrant with their whole lives ahead of them. And Noodles declines. The movie ends with Noodles declining. Max supposedly kills himself by jumping into a trash truck. And then Noodles just kind of wanders off into the sunset. This movie, if you can tell that we are struggling to sort of summarize what's going on in this movie, because there are a couple key major plot points, but the big issue with it is that in its
It was
original,
so dragged out.
yeah, there's
Lucas, before we recorded this, I actually did watch the American release of this movie. Oh my god. So much better. We would have an entirely different look on this movie if we did not watch the long version first.
what are some elements that are what are some good elements about this film that stood out to you?
Good elements of this film. Um, the scenery, obviously, they knocked it out of the park with actually representing how I believe this was Buffalo, New York, if I'm
Yes.
correct. This was Buffalo, New York during the Prohibition era. It pretty much looks spot on with it. The ambient music, Lucas, that we didn't really get to hear too much when we were watching the movie, I actually got to listen to in the American release, and it actually helped a lot with some
Mm,
of the dragged out scenes that we were watching. That we were like, "What's going on? Why is it dull?" etc.
beautiful score. Yeah. The,
Also, I think if it wasn't for the fact that we had to watch the entire prequel hour for the whole setup, which actually got cut down a lot in the American release, this made Noodle's character so much better because it actually didn't make him seem like, just a peeping Tom the entire time.
oh yeah, I forgot. This movie's very creepy. There's a lot of lingering shots of this guy staring at
It's very
girls.
oddly sexual.
Yes, very, because it messes with minors, which is just I get that it's trying to be like Boyhood, but again, this is why novels certain elements from the novel can't be translated to film. You don't want to watch that stuff.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. A comment that I have made on this movie, which it is a terrible comment to make out of context, but a scene where a woman was getting quote unquote fondled was arguably one of the more impactful scenes in the movie because it was actually decent acting compared to the rest of the absolute snore fest that was this film, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a shame that Cass is very talented, but this film is too realistic for its own good. That scene in question that he's talking about is the main character, Noodles. He rapes his childhood crush after she refuses his advances. And yeah, I mean, there are pockets of gold in this movie. Every 20 or so minutes, there's something really interesting that happens, but a lot of the scenes, at least in the original cut, are just prolonged dialogue sequences. It's a lot like a play. We have characters moving around these sets. It's like 6 or 7 minutes worth of talking, reflecting on their lives, past, present, future, big themes, big picture, but it just doesn't land because there's not enough action to really carry this. I feel like there is a personality to this film. It is supposed to be slow, it is supposed to be dramatic. The score does give a lot of personality to this film, but my big problem with it is that it doesn't hold a candle to other media that I've seen in this genre. Media that's much more exciting, media
Absolutely.
with characters that are much more dynamic who I relate to.
Yeah, this movie was just like it just felt all over the place as far as the pacing went. Like as you said, you had the 20 minutes of just straight dialogue and then moving around a set, and then you'd have your little plot twist, or you'd have your little gunfight, or you'd have some kids getting jumped, but then it would just go back to 20 minutes of dialogue and then kind of repeat the process. So even then, the good parts of this film almost felt mundane.
Yeah, there's nothing drawing me into Noodle's story. I'm sorry. I get that we established the sympathy by seeing him as sort of an outcast, a little like a street rat of sorts who kind of just goes around a little smart for his age. I can see why we would be invested through showing us his childhood. In fact, I much prefer when movies show instead of tell these sort of things. But there's just so much information just shoved in your face. And again, this film's too realistic for its own good. It reminds me why the mafia isn't good. There's nothing likable, there's nothing charismatic about these characters, and it's not an enjoyable viewing experience.
No, no, compared to other like mafia type projects that we've watched, like for instance, I mean, obviously, this is one of the greatest shows of all time, but like The Sopranos, I know the characters in that show are a lot more relatable to our modern day compared to, a bunch of Jewish gangsters that are just there to hassle people the entire time and be hornballs. It's it's just pathetic to me, in this opinion, that a movie that gets this kind of like critical claim to me and you just seems like another like 4 hour experience of nothing.
Maybe it's impressive in the fact that it replicates the mundaneness and brutality of the mafia in the same way that Come and See represents the brutality of war. But where Come and See differs is that there is a clear message to the movie. There is a clear, powerful, and emotional reaction that I get out of it. This one, I was never invested in Noodle's story. I don't care at all about Max, especially considering the fact that the so called twist where he is Mr. Bailey, there's no payoff to it because we never see him benefit directly from the money beyond the so-called golden years, the golden year
Exactly.
1933.
Yeah, that never gets shown.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's apparent in the production design. It's very implicit. It's okay. It is shown indirectly, but I just don't have. There's nothing interesting that Max or Noodles does that makes me care about the narrative. They're just living their lives, and it's realistic in that sense. But in terms of a piece of art that I want to consume, I have no reason to rewatch this.
Exactly. I completely agree. Like I would probably at most rewatch the American release version just
Yeah,
because a lot of what me and you thought was like dragged out, boring, all that kind of nonsense, a lot of that was taken out of the film, which was really nice. But as you said, no real point to revisit it.
take a look at The Godfather. Michael Corleone, he doesn't want to be his dad, but he also wants to be his dad. There are goals there. There are no goals with Noodles in this film. He just wants money. It's all external. There's nothing internally motivating him, and I feel like that's the big issue.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that.
What do you rate this film?
What do I rate this film? If I was rating the American release of this movie, I would give it a 3.5. But since I'm rating the feature length version of this movie, I am giving it a 2.
Rating the feature length version of this film, I give it a star and a half. It is not, it is a reflection of my own feelings towards the film. It is not a reflection of quality because there is a lot that's done well in this. All the acting's believable, the production design is great, the score is great, but in terms of story, in terms of flow, in terms of editing, in terms of creative decisions, I don't like any of it. I don't. There's nothing worse than watching a film that makes me feel like I've wasted my time, and I've never felt more like I've wasted my time watching this film.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself.
So that means it's at the bottom of the list.
Absolutely. Akira has finally gotten bumped up.
Akira's dethroned. All right. Before we close out this week's episode, I want to talk a bit about a poll I ran. I decided to ask people, because we were talking about Tarantino's films last week. I asked them what they thought of Reservoir Dogs and if they thought that that was his best movie. I got a couple yeses from people. I got yeses from Caitlin Foreman, Kenneth Bickle, Dylan Mullis, Irvish Patel, Conrad Del Galvis, Jason Cullen, Bailey Weaverling, and David Mata. A lot more yeses than I thought. I'm not going to lie, I was a bit surprised. In terms of what type of Pop Tart Sid eats, because I know that was another conversation, Sydney Stewart says cinnamon, but he makes his mom take off the edges before giving it to him. Ethan Handley
That's
said,
not a terrible take.
yeah, it's definitely not. You know for a fact Sid's bossing around his mom. He's got an alcoholic dad after all as an influence. Ethan Handley says, Ethan Hanley says, doesn't matter. He eats Pop Tarts like Cookie Monster eats cookies.
All right, that's not a terrible take either.
Eric
I'm still
Pick
curious on the flavor.
Eric Pick says, definitely cookies and cream. Maggie
Okay, all right, that's not terrible.
Maggie Scanlon says blueberry.
See, now that honestly would kind of make sense, considering he's. I think blueberry might be the option here, Lucas. I'm not gonna lie.
I don't know. I feel like he doesn't. I feel like Sid doesn't touch fruit. Like maybe he's touched Frankenberry, but I don't
Maybe
know.
he's touched Frankenberry is crazy.
We don't know. It was the '90s, man. But
Yeah, that's a good point.
we did have a majority vote, and that was Oreo because Conrad Del Galvis said Oreo, and that leads two responses from Oreo, which is the majority.
All right, all right.
All right. So what are we looking at next week? Let's pull up the list here.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was about to ask you that.
All right, the next movie, it's a classic, it's a big one. You know it, I know it. It's 2001: A Space Odyssey. We'll see you next
Oh
week.
boy, here we go. Peace out, people.